Welcome back. I'm Peter St. Onge. This is a weekly roundup of my daily videos on the economy and freedom, where I cut through the BS and lay out what the gaslighting clowns pulled out of their hats this week and what is coming next. Welfare fraud is eating America alive. Forget Somali Leering Center. Say hello to Los Angeles Hospice. In a report last week, Dr. Oz, who is currently the head of Medicare and Medicaid, found 72 fraudulent hospice companies in a single building in L.A. Across L.A., there's an estimated 700 hospices that have triggered multiple red flags, which Dr. Oz estimates at nearly $3.5 billion of fraud. To give you a sense of scale, California is about a third more elderly than Florida. California is big, but California has 11 times more hospices, 2,279 versus Florida's 208. In fact, 1 in 3 hospices in America are in Los Angeles County. That apparently never raised an eyebrow. Of course, hospice is just the beginning. New York recently admitted they spend $82,000 per year for every homeless person, projected to rise to $97,000. San Francisco spent $141,000 per homeless person. That's worth noting the average American spends $60,000 a year, meaning New York homeless should be living better than the average American. They should be vacationing in Tuscany and buying tasteful art pieces for their vacation homes. San Francisco homeless should be living like kings. Of course, they are not, for the simple reason the money does not go to the homeless, it goes to the nonprofits that make up the welfare fraud industrial complex. One Mississippi nonprofit stole $77 million. A Medicare Advantage fraud in California stole $90 million with fake patients. Homeless people make excellent fake patients. One Indian dentist in Pennsylvania fraudulently billed $32 million while also fraudulently bringing in H-1Bs and getting kickbacks from them. Section 8, addiction programs, autism therapy, fake ambulances for government-funded medical transportation. The list goes on. In Minnesota alone, federal prosecutors are estimating $9 billion in fraudulent Medicaid payments alone, which extrapolates to hundreds of billions nationwide. IRS sampling implies $120 billion in fraud in California alone. So how can trillions of fraud run day in, day out for decades? Easy. Nonprofits are the foot soldiers of the Democrat Party. They round up the votes, kick back campaign donations, they protest or riot when needed, and in return, they cash over $1 trillion of your tax money. To give a sense, in New York City, 1 in 5 people now work for a government-funded nonprofit. 1 in 3 foreign-born work for a nonprofit. More than half of non-whites work for a nonprofit, which does wonders for New York Democrats at election time. Now, for years, Republicans would look at the left's insta-mobs and joke, we can't do that because our people have jobs. Turns out their people do have jobs. You're paying for the riots and the stolen elections. So what's next? There was a time when nonprofit meant volunteer nurses helping sick kids. Today's nonprofits are trillion-dollar siphons funding the progressive revolution. Doge took aim and Elon paid the price. Republicans in Congress, meanwhile, are happy to let it run so long as they get some crumbs. And as always, you will be signing the checks. Inflation is back, with the Fed admitting money growth doubled in February. Note that is before the war and the spike in oil prices. Will we look back with nostalgia upon Bidenflation? Last week, the Fed announced February money growth doubled to $198 billion, up from just $82 in January. That's precisely double the $93 billion monthly run since Trump took office. Now, 198 is 11% annualized. Moreover, it's almost as much as the $245 billion per month they were printing during the worst of COVID, which you will recall begat double-digit inflation. Now, this matters because spiking oil prices get headlines, but what goes up goes down. It's the money supply, money printing, that causes permanent inflation, like it did under Biden. So the rule of thumb is inflation is money growth minus economic growth. Visually, you got a pile of money, you got a pile of stuff, GDP, and you divide them to get prices. Now, since Trump took office, M2's been growing around 5%, and the economy's been growing around 3%, which leaves 2% inflation. But at the current 11% growth in money, Even if the economy returned to pre-war 3% growth, you're talking 11 minus 3 makes 8% inflation. If the war slows the economy and raises money growth to pay for the war, it could take us back over double digits, worse than Biden. Now, it doesn't happen tomorrow. A typical delay on money printing is 12 to 18 months, but the path we are on guarantees us Bidenflation in 2027. So what's causing it? About a third of last month's jump in money was rising bank lending since the economy was doing very well before the war. When you borrow money or your company borrows money, the bank does not raid the vault. They literally print it on a spreadsheet. Well, they print almost all of it. The Fed requires 7 to 10 cents in the vault, so-called fractional reserve banking. All the rest is magicked up. Now, bank lending is not necessarily inflationary. If it grows the economy, it'll cancel out. The problem is the other two-thirds that are printed by Washington, money that does not grow the economy. A big hump was the Fed itself, which created a net $83 billion by flipping from selling off assets to printing more money, called quantitative easing or QE. They did this to grease the skids on Wall Street, which needs permanent money. Like any shark, Wall Street needs the printers to keep going or it dies. And then the big one, federal spending. Treasury borrowed $140 billion last month, which is annualized almost $2 trillion. Keep in mind that's before the war, which is running about $2 billion a day or $700 a year. So what's next depends on the war. Oil prices and war spending could tack another 3% onto inflation. Toss in a slowing economy. Remember, inflation is money growth minus GDP growth, and it will get back to Biden territory. And even if the war ends tomorrow, we are back to those February numbers of 11% that were driving gold and silver to the moon on expectations of future inflation. The only solution is epic growth. GDP so big, even 11% money printing can't kill it. Before the war, there was a chance between rate cuts and factory onshoring, but the war froze both. The Fed has already flipped to hikes, while trillions of foreign investment is deer in the headlights until the war ends. If that continues, the word for 2026 will be stagflation. A word from our sponsor. If you own gold, and many of you do, you already understand how it protects your wealth from the insanity coming out of Washington. The inflation, the recessions, the wars. But with monetary metals, there's a way to actually earn a yield of up to 4% on your gold paid in more ounces of gold. You retain ownership of real, allocated physical gold with no storage costs while your ounces grow every month outside the banking system. If you're serious about protecting your future and building your legacy, head to monetarymetals.com/Peter to get started. One of the best ways to secure your Bitcoin is with a hardware wallet, a physical device that lets you keep your coins offline without internet connection. One of the most trusted names in hardware wallets is CoinKite, maker of the famous block clock. CoinKite devices are made in Canada and they're run by passionate Bitcoiners who've been at this since 2012, back when Bitcoiners were trading in person at swap meets. You can pick up hardware wallets and plenty of other goodies at coinkite.com/ProfSaintAnge. That's CoinKite.com/ProfSaintAnge. Okay, back to our show. The Supreme Court is poised to take up birthright citizenship. Will the court grow a pair and finally end the intentional perversion of a 160-year-old policy originally intended to benefit free slaves? This morning, the court's set to take up a case whether anybody in the U.S., even illegally, deserves automatic citizenship upon birth. This would affect the nearly 1 in 4 births per year that are to non-citizens, so-called anchor babies, who then make the entire family eligible for all welfare benefits actual citizens can use, which is, of course, a giant magnet for millions of third-worlders. So the background is countries admit immigrants because they bring something to the table: skills, investment capital. The idea being rich countries can cherry-pick the top 0.1%, the Elon Musks or Steve Jobs, who was Syrian origin. But the left discovered that migration is an excellent way to make states blue, starting with California, which used to be rock-ribbed conservative. Both Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan were former governors of California before it got swamped by mass migration. Now, given the stakes, the left was not choosy about who it brought, leading to entire swaths of, say, East LA turning into third world slums, because voting for Democrats was what they brought to the table. And one of the main tools to bring migrants, aside from unskilled wages 20 times higher than back in India, was access to welfare. According to a study by the Center for Immigration Statistics, most legal migrant households use at least one major welfare program, so 56% of green card holders. These are not the top tenth of a percent. This is half higher than native-born. Of course, it's much worse for illegals. Once they got the anchor baby, welfare use soars to 87%, taking an average $23,000 a year in welfare. That is definitely not the top tenth of a percent. Note, on top of welfare, you also paid for their public schools and, of course, police and prison when they go bad. Might bring it to $60,000 to $70,000 per year. Now, birthright citizenship was originally passed in the 14th Amendment just after the Civil War to give citizenship to freed slaves. The key phrase being, quote, all persons born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Subject to the jurisdiction was intended to exclude people who are citizens of another country. For example, diplomats or hostile occupiers like Pancho Villa. The logic being they already have a country. The 14th was for freed slaves who would otherwise be stateless. By that logic, no migrant should be able to access birthright citizenship. They already have a country called Mexico or India. That's especially true of illegals who are literally fugitives. They are hostile occupation. Alas, in a 1898 case called Wong Kim Ark, the Supreme Court granted citizenship to the child of legal migrants from China. The dissent correctly pointed out that they were already subjects of China. They were not stateless. But the majority, including justices associated with railroads who wanted cheap Chinese labor, ignored the Constitution, rewriting jurisdiction to mean physically present. And even that was legal migrants. Illegals has never been decided until today. So as next, birthright makes up 1 in 4 births in the U.S., so 1 in 4 future voters, including 250,000 births to illegals, more than all the births in New England. Prediction market Kalshi pegs just 9% odds Trump wins, meaning 91% odds the third world pipeline continues, and next Democrat president, it will turn into a flood. As AI wipes out jobs for the young, a new study finds nearly half of jobs in China's major cities are gig work, from live streamers and freelancers to Uber and food delivery. It is soaring as the trade war and slowdowns in manufacturing and construction gut hiring of 9-to-5s, with gig work absorbing millions of Chinese who cannot find jobs. Now, this is interesting because China's slowdown is a natural experiment for what happens here if AI starts displacing millions of jobs for the young. And the answer for better or worse is gig work. The background is China's growth slowed by half since President Xi took over in 2012, going from 10% in China's go-go days to just over 5% nowadays. It was actually revised to the slowest in 30 years recently. The slowdown spiked youth employment, which rose from a tenth to a record 21.3% in 2023, at which point the Chinese government stopped reporting it. Got worse as China got a double hit from an imploding property market and manufacturing overcapacity with Trump's trade war. Now, China's biggest solar maker just laid off a third of workers, while roughly 400 out of 500 Chinese electric vehicle makers have already gone bust. The problem is these are both much bigger than the U.S., so manufacturing in China is about 3 times the size of the U.S., almost a third of their economy. Residential construction in China is nearly 5 times bigger than the U.S., including entire ghost cities. So implosion in 2 industries that make up most of China's jobs. Compare this to AI, which threatens perhaps 1 in 5 jobs in the U.S. China is facing half of jobs, and they are concentrated among the young since companies always cut hiring before they start layoffs. Enter China's gig army, which started in the mid-2010s with Chinese versions of Uber, called Didi, DoorDash, Meituan, and an army of live streamers, including thousands of young women who film under overpasses in posh neighborhoods so their geolocation shows up as China's equivalent of Beverly Hills. Now, these also grew in the U.S., including busty live streamers, but they exploded in China. To give a sense, a single Chinese site, 58.com, lets you hire for one-off jobs like movers, nannies, or home repair. It registers over 100 million visits per month, while the leading U.S. equivalent TaskRabbit has just over 1 million visitors, even controlling for population that is 20 times bigger. Across all platforms, gig work is the main source of income for roughly 27 million Americans, but it's the main source for an estimated 240 million Chinese, nearly double the share, coming to nearly half the population in major cities like Shenzhen and Shanghai, with up to 70% of young people doing gig work at least part-time. Last one with a 9-to-5 turn out the lights. So as such, AI job replacement is barely showing up in the total job numbers, but it's slamming young workers in the U.S., especially Americans with $150,000 degrees in psychology or gender studies. The solution is cut red tape, cut small business tax, make it as easy as possible to hire part-time or full-time. Metaphorically, jobs are a river that can get blocked by a weak economy, and the solution is clear the government debris that kills millions of jobs in normal times but turns catastrophic when you've got a technological shock. A word from our sponsor. Stocks and even gold are all over the place. If you're ready to diversify, Abundant Minds makes Bitcoin mining simple, transparent, and human. You can deduct every penny thanks to Trump's big beautiful bill. It's a 401k for Bitcoin mining. Founded by husband-wife team Bo and Christine Marie Turner after losing $500,000 to broken promises in the mining industry, Abundant Minds was built to protect investors. You own the machines, and they make it turnkey with hosting in their facilities in Oregon. Pricing is clear with one flat monthly fee and no surprises, and they guarantee uptime so you keep earning day in, day out. If you want easy diversification without pressure, learn more at abundantminds.com/Peter to get some of your first Bitcoin mined for free as a gift to my audience. The biggest risk in Bitcoin isn't volatility, it's custody. Because Bitcoin removes the safety net, there is no bank to call, no reset button if something goes wrong. The reality is most people are not properly set up. They hold Bitcoin but rely on exchanges, incomplete wallet setups, and have no real plan for privacy or inheritance. Is exactly what the Bitcoin way solves. They help you move from exposure to actual ownership, self-custody done right, privacy, inheritance, even running your own node, all set up with you step by step. They never touch your Bitcoin, they're your support team. Go to thebitcoinway.com/ProfSaintAnge to book a free call and go from where you are today to a much stronger setup. Now back to our show. It's official, the federal government is bankrupt. Now, unless you live under a rock, you knew this, but they're admitting it is comforting or perhaps terrifying. Last week, the Department of Treasury released its consolidated financial statements for fiscal 2025, reporting that the federal government has just over $6 trillion in assets, so that's land, buildings, student loans. But according to Treasury, it has nearly $48 trillion of debt, coming to negative $42 trillion net worth, which is roughly $500,000 for a family of four, and getting worse at $2.5 trillion per year. Now, you'll notice $48 trillion of debt is higher than the official national debt, which just crossed $39 trillion 2 weeks ago. Congratulations, Congress. And that is because there's trillions of so-called non-debt liabilities like federal employee pensions or loan guarantees, where government guarantees crony loans since it looks better than writing checks. Now, Treasury's tally excludes an additional $88 trillion in so-called off-balance sheet debt made up of Social Security, Medicare, and yet more pensions the government has promised to pay and will pay given all of these are politically untouchable. Those went up nearly $10 trillion last year with Medicare and Social Security shortfalls, which is more than a third of GDP per year. It's worth noting for the 29th year in a row that the GAO, the federal government's auditor, stuck a big disclaimer saying this is only the debt they could find. There could be a lot more. Nobody knows, certainly not the department that's supposed to know. Put it together and it's $136 trillion of debt, just shy of a gazillion, rising by $12 trillion per year. Put differently, 1/3 of everything you made last year, every morning you got up and go to work, it went to taxes. Another third was earmarked for future government spending. You lived on the crumbs. Now, to put this all into concrete numbers, a typical American family makes $80,000 a year. has between 150 and 200,000 of regular debt, mortgage, cars, credit cards, and apparently they owe $1.5 million of government debt, rising at $3,000 per month. And of course, that's just the debt Treasury knows about. So as such, the war is hogging the headlines at the moment, but behind the scenes, we are headed off a fiscal cliff. They'll borrow as much as they can, apparently $136 trillion so far, to postpone the crash, that day when lenders stop, market interest rates spike to double digits, and we get a financial crisis that makes 2008 look like a picnic. The solution is very easy: slash federal spending by a couple trillion, maybe hold off on wars for a couple decades, close some Somali leering centers, perhaps even a balanced budget amendment, or my personal favorite, Warren Buffett's proposal that if Congress can't pass a budget, they have to resign and are banned from politics for life. Of course, none of this will happen because for both parties, kicking the can is a lot more fun than slashing Washington. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and go to petersanons.com for daily videos and in-depth articles with charts and all the gory details. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.